Hello, everyone. Space Cafe Podcast, Episode 3. Hey, everyone. This is Markus and Anna, and this is, of course, your Space Cafe Podcast, hot and fresh, delivered to your
desk,
doorstep, desk, throat.
Oh, doorstep, probably more suitable in these times. Doorstep.
Good point. It's a lot healthier.
Yeah.
How are you these days, Anna?
So, other than trying to keep sane, looking at the amazing space sector that we have here in Scotland, really impressed with...
Hold on. I say that again. There's a space sector in Scotland?
There is. And
I mean, like, this is almost like if I told you that there's a space sector in Austria.
Yeah, I mean, every day is a new discovery. There's so much to get to know here, from Edinburgh University and what they're doing at the Base Centre to UK's first launch company, Skyrora, and others. It's really cool, actually. I'm quite surprised, but in a good way. And we're going to be releasing a really interesting opinion piece on SpaceWatch.Global, so stay tuned because it's all about the space sector in Scotland. And by the way, just before we get going, did you know that the largest number of CubeSats are produced in Glasgow out of anywhere in Europe?
You keep surprising me. So
I know.
There's a question that bugs me. I'd like to ask you.
Sure.
It's really obvious that the space industry and everything attached to that topic is exploding these days. That even Glasgow has its CubeSat factory. Do you think that we are currently living in a special moment in history? Do you think that there was a way to find out to be in a very special, selected, chosen pocket in the course of human history?
Well,
what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, just looking at in terms of not even looking at the space sector, but the global pandemic, I mean, sure, this is the moment right now, and we're still living through it. But when it comes to space, I also believe that this is the moment. And we've seen a lot more activity. We've seen a lot more debate happening around space security, space law, resources, what we do in outer space when it comes to resources and mining and settlements. I mean, sure, these have been going on for decades, but now they've really resurfaced. And it's incredible to kind of listen in and sort of form, of course we can form our own opinion, but was a bit concerning. And maybe this is the same for you, but I'm feeling like the framework side is it's not caught up with the
tech side,
right, or the pursuit of going out there and mining. And I feel like the law is lagging. So this is something I'd love to discuss later with Daniel Porras, who's going to be with us. But that's something that gives a big question mark in my head.
And the interesting thing, of course, is that space is filling up with new players. So we're not only talking about the usual suspects, United States, Russia, and China anymore. But this is, of course, your ballpark, Anna.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to see over the past few years all the different space agencies and movements towards building foundations and institutions on space in respective countries. I mean, Pakistan is the latest to join the club.
Pakistan.
I'm sure but it's a one-man show. It's Pakistan's first private space company called the Rocket and Satellite Company. But this is just the beginning.
Interesting.
Right.
But a man and a mission.
A man on a mission.
Okay. But those stories, I mean, like, this is what makes what's very special about our little project here, SpaceWatch.Global, that we get to talk to these people and get to read and write beautiful op-eds and pieces about those projects. And this is, I think, what makes SpaceWatch.Global special and sets it apart from others, right?
Sure, and I think the biggest factor here with SpaceWatch.Global is that it's truly a global voice for the industry. It's not just about the big space giants that we find in the US. Of course, they're our friends, and we cover their stories and their developments. But it's really about other space nations and the ambitions that other space nations have,
and other voices.
Absolutely. And so, it's really interesting to be part of this project, I have to say.
Yeah. Speaking of voices, Anna, we do have a pretty interesting voice on the show today.
We do. He did appear a couple of weeks ago on the Web Talk series with Torsten Kreining, but Daniel's back with us. Daniel is the newly appointed head of partnerships and communications for the Secure World Foundation. But Daniel's also been serving as the Space Security Fellow at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. His main focus has been on the progressive development of sustainable norms of behavior for space activity. So it'd be interesting to hear about some of those so-called sustainable norms of behavior. He's also conducting a lot of research on the emergence of new technologies and approaches to strategic stability in outer space. He was a resident technical expert for multiple UN bodies working on space security issues, including the group of governmental experts on the prevention of an arms race in outer space. So we did get a message from Daniel the other day about his new publication, which is the Alternative Approaches and Indicators for the Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space. And he dived right in and said that we've now, quoting, have plenty of evidence that we are in an arms race in space. Or rather, there is an arms race and space is just another part of it.
Wow. ...
Wow.
Super interesting. And now, ladies and gentlemen out there, Daniel Porras is with us right now on the show. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, Markus. Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be joining you today.
A quick note to our listeners. This is the moment no podcaster wants to experience. You have the greatest voice and the worst audio quality. Usually we equip our interview partners with state-of-the-art microphones to be able to present you the audio quality you expect and deserve. But sometimes, things do not work out the way intended. So quick ideas are gold. So what do you do if your interview partner is on the other side of the globe and you have only one shot? Well, here comes a free pro trick from Space Cafe Podcast Labs. Just use your smartphone as an external microphone. Hit the inbuilt note-taking app and hit record, and you're done. This will usually produce a decent audio quality file if no pro equipment is around. Okay, on with the show. Daniel, can you give us a little lowdown on yourself, on your professional self? What keeps you awake these days in your professional life?
Sure. No, I'm glad we are recording this on multiple fronts. Can you also hear me okay? Yeah. So my name is Daniel Porras. I am the Space Security Fellow at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. This organization is an independent research organization which is located within the UN but also without, so that we can provide independent research and analysis for member states and also for other interested parties. I've been doing space law for about 15 years now. Yeah, it's been a while. And I've been doing space security for about 10 years. What keeps me awake at night? It is a lack of self-awareness on the parts of certain countries who, we're in this situation at the moment, and we have been in a situation since the Cold War. It's kind of like I refer to it as a nuclear Mexican standoff, where certain countries have very powerful weapons pointed at each other, and they don't use them because that if one person uses them, everyone uses them, and then we all have a very bad day. But with space, we've noticed that there is an Achilles heel to a lot of the military systems. Everyone is very reliant on space, but people weren't really worried about protecting their space assets or making space trying to protect and strengthen their capabilities so that they couldn't be attacked, because you always just thought, well, once you put a satellite in space, it's safe. It's a safe space. what we're finding today is, no, actually, now we have the ability to mess with some of that stuff. Fabulous.
And switch the lights off.
Well, potentially. There's a lot of really tricky things that people could do, very clever things, which would disrupt society tremendously. Now, these aren't things that you can't also do with a really good hack. So, for example, my doomsday scenario is if somebody managed to destroy a bunch of GPS satellites at once, enough to the point where the GPS network isn't really functional anymore. We are so dependent on global positioning, and in particular the U.S. GPS system, it is in fact a doomsday scenario. I mean, finance alone would suffer tremendously because a lot of financial transactions depend on a time signature from an atomic clock, so that you know exactly what time the transaction happened. Mm-hmm. So like stocks in New York Stock Exchange, they have to have this very precise stamp. Well, what happens when you shut off the GPS and all of a sudden, you can't have that
everything
anymore.
Comes to a halt.
Yeah. I mean, hackers only need to get it right once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the people defending those systems need to get it right all the time, every time.
And so, that could be something that could potentially take place with certain counter space capabilities. I mean, it would have to be an attack of a massive size.
Right.
But perhaps something that's even more troubling is what happens when certain counter space capabilities start getting out and people use them not for the really big, Dr. Evil, massive take over the world plot, but just for smaller, more kind of, I don't want to say annoying things because it's more grave than that. But yeah, just kind of sort of using them for pestering. For example, we had the incident a few years ago where the North Koreans were spoofing or blocking the GPS signals at Seoul Airport. And so whenever planes would come within a certain distance of the airport, they would lose their GPS signal. Unfortunately, the aircraft have other systems to make sure that they can land properly. But, already just messing with that kind of a system at that level, think of how many lives you're potentially putting at risk, and for what? There was
from a legal perspective, how do you enforce the law in these types of situations? I mean, such a gray area. Yeah, right. I mean, is there a universal law in space? Is that what we're aiming towards?
So the laws in space are pretty fundamental and very open-ended. We have the Outer Space Treaty, which is, if you read through it, there are very few concrete provisions in the Outer Space Treaty. So the only arms control provision in any legal system for space is Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty that very specifically says no nuclear weapons, no weapons of mass destruction in outer space. But other than that, it's pretty vague on any of that anything related to space security. It says, for example, that any human activities or any activities in outer space have to comply with international law. Okay, well, great. So I guess the UN Charter applies, which means no threat or use of force in outer space. Okay, well, what does that mean? We don't know. No one's really come up with we've never seen an explanation or a good definition of what we think is, even an attack on a satellite. So yeah, we've got a lot of great laws and rules that could potentially apply to outer space, but we haven't really set out how to use them. And worse, there is no enforcement in space. There was a liability convention out there that was almost used once when a Russian satellite crashed into Canada, but they settled out of court.
So your modules are quite small then in space law.
Yes and no. We've been getting so much more activity in the last few years that it has blown the roof on not just what is possible, but now what is going to be needed. So, for example, space traffic management is really becoming a much more plausible today, thanks to SpaceX, because of all the mega constellations that are starting to go up. We had that near collision between one of the Starlink satellites and the Aeolus weather satellite. And now all of a sudden people are finally asking, well, wait a minute, who has to move if there's something if someone's about to collide? Well, I don't know. There's no rule. Right. It's the other guy. But it's really complicated because any given satellite that goes up is on a limited power source, and the power source is largely what drives the profitability of the satellite or the utility of the satellite. So if you're having to move around because of other traffic, you're cutting into the usefulness of your satellite. Mm-hmm. So who moves? Sometimes it's much easier for a smaller satellite that may have been there longer to get out of the way than it is for a larger satellite. But we don't, there's nothing codified.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the industry can create self-moving satellites, then I think that's the answer. I mean, I know Astroscale is doing a lot of great work. They're trying to do some demonstrations around, removing some of this debris out there, but it's not going to be enough.
Yeah.
Guys, we might want to take a look at history here. There's a nice story I would like to draw our attention to, so we can perhaps take a look at how they did it back during the times of the great explorers, back in the 15th century. Do you know how the Spanish and the Portuguese settled their territorial claims?
Didn't they just get the Pope to sort that out?
Well, I don't know about that, but here's what they did. They divided the globe into two sections and drew a line from north to south, completely ignoring that there were other nations on the globe. But hey, they had the bigger ships. Every new land discovered west of the African continent belonged to the Spanish crown, everything east to Portugal. So it didn't really matter who discovered what. It mattered where it was discovered.
Well, we don't need any lines drawn in space.
Yeah, I think that
we can help it.
Well, I was just going to say the problem there is like someone, you're going to start having people say, all right, everything between these orbits belongs to me. But I think that treaty was actually negotiated by the Pope. It was Alexander VI, I think. So, one of the things that we're really hoping for when we go to work every day and try and talk to countries about, all right, space security, there's an arms race in space. How do we deal with a lot of these issues? And our suggestions thus far are start small, try to identify some areas where there's universal agreement. Things like space traffic management, where everybody has an interest in using space more efficiently. So, much like roads and highways, people can travel at faster velocities and with some certainty that they're going to get from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. That invites more investment. I think it could also do a lot for space security, because if you start setting up some rules about how satellites should behave, it's a lot easier to say, this is all normal behavior, it's non-threatening, and look, you're getting way out of line, you're doing something. Now you can say that you're doing something abnormal, and that's potentially threatening to me. So it brings a lot more transparency and a lot more accountability, I think, to states. And unfortunately, the list of problems that are out there are huge, and some of them are largely political and not even technical.
Well, the good news is that we have solved all the problems here on Earth, so we shouldn't have too much of a difficulty to clean up space, right? No, seriously. We cannot even clean up the mess we left in our oceans, places that fall under no nation's jurisdiction. It could give us such a nice playground before venturing out into space.
Areas that are global commons?
Seriously, how can we govern space if we cannot do it on our own little island?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not about governing space, it's about governing ourselves. The laws in space are not necessarily to govern outer space, it's to govern human activities therein. And that's, I think, one of the bigger challenges that we have, that we all have such different visions of what outer space should be like. And when you really start talking to certain folks about how do you see space? How do you see your country's activities in space? How do you see people's activities in space? A lot of us have very different ideas. Some people think about very universal hopes and aspirations about science and exploration and this environment where we all benefit from its wonders and treasures. And then there are other people who are like, they see it in a very national lens. And to them, it's, oh, well, that's our domain. We're going there because we're the best people and we get to I don't know, explore it. And we're the ones that are going to conquer it and set the rules and be the leaders in this area. And we're going to dominate this area. And yeah, I know I'm using a lot of the language that the U.S. often throws out, but I do think that some of the folks who drafted that language and who come up with that language have a very different idea from what some of the other folks, especially in the science community, think about outer space.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the science community. I mean, what level of representation do they really have in all of this? I mean, how big is their voice? Or how does that change? I mean, if it's zero, I mean, how do we, they need to be better represented. Yeah. Are you going to do that for them?
Well, the science community is very well represented, for example, in, you could say like the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in Vienna. There they invite a lot of space agencies and they try to tackle a lot of issues that are quite technical and very safety oriented. But when it comes to the geopolitical side of things, it's the militaries. They're the ones who are calling the shots. And some of the biggest problems and challenges that we have related to space security are largely driven by geopolitical considerations. Things about nuclear weapons or things about other states gaining an advantage in space and taking what they call it, like the ultimate high ground. But until Russia and China and the United States and India as well, until they fix their relationship, fix their marriages down here on Earth, I mean, space is just a reflection of what's going on down here.
Yeah. So what is your solution? What's your roadmap? And how long will it take to have a solution?
Unfortunately, I think the solution is going to come when there's a tragedy. This also keeps me up at night quite a lot. So, for example...
By the way, that's our happy show.
Yeah, I know. Well, Torsten should have told you this before. Whenever I come on the show, everyone's always like, oh, God, it's that Darth Vader kid coming on to talk about Star Wars again. What a happy tone. But... one of the things that really makes me nervous is, so last year, you may recall that India tested or they demonstrated that they have ASAT capabilities. They used a direct ascent missile, which is a converted missile interceptor to hit a satellite. They hit it at about 280 kilometers in altitude. And despite many assurances that the debris would come down within a matter of weeks, we know more than a year later, we're still tracking plenty of pieces of debris up pretty high. Some pieces even over 1,000 kilometers in altitude. For some of your listeners that need a little bit of reference, the International Space Station flies at 400 kilometers. So that test definitely put debris within the range of human spaceflight. That's dangerous. And I could see a situation where a shuttle or, I really hope it's not one of the first tourist trips to go up into space. But yeah,
but that's only in a couple of weeks.
Can you imagine like somebody takes a hit and then all of a sudden we have the first deaths in space. We've never lost anyone in space. Now we've lost people going up and coming down. Those were great tragedies. But up to now, no human being has ever died in space. Whatever we call it.
So, are the launch companies like SpaceX, Boeing, Blue, etc., are they doing enough to really kind of be part of this conversation and part of the solution? Like, are they just keep launching satellites all day long? But what are they doing?
Well, it depends on which set of issues you're talking about. On the safety side of things, yes, the commercial side has been very open. They try to be a part of the conversation as much as possible. And we've got some fantastic actors that go out of their way to be responsible. So I can't say enough about Rocket Labs. Rocket Labs, they took on the measures early on. Yeah. Peter Beck, he's a very,
New Zealand,
not just a great businessman, but he's also a really, he's a good person who looks around and says, let's be good stewards of what we have. So they do a great job. But on the security side of things, it's still really difficult to get industry involved, largely because states militaries in particular, and ministries of defense, see this as being a state-driven issue. We're talking about war. We're talking about people going into conflict in space. That's not the realm of industry. It's the realm of states. And even when we have tried to interact with industry on this, a lot of times they just defer to their governments and just say, we can't really get involved in this. Go check with our embassies. Now, that's, I suppose from a political perspective, that's shrewd. But where it starts getting a little bit sticky is that industry is very integrated already with the military, and they're trying to get even more integrated. What happens when other combatants, other armies, other militaries can start targeting your satellites? Let's say that there's like a Eutelsat satellite that is providing services for 100 different customers. It's got 100 transponders and 100 different customers. And one of those customers is also the U.S. military. And, let's go back to our example of broadband for providing bandwidth for drones. What if, am I going out? What happens when you have a situation where a military that's being invaded starts jamming that Eutelsat satellite because it is providing a service to attack them? Well, is that company a legitimate military target? And what happens to all the other customers that are now losing out on their service because this satellite has been attacked?
The question,
you know what? If I had a satellite out there, I would mount a fat laser gun on it, just in case,
Yeah. And then, that's part of what Space Force is meant to do. It's meant to, for example, if a satellite is being jammed, they have to know how to switch channels so that they can get to still be able to have the benefits of those space systems. But if that's the road that we want to go down, then we're just going to see more and more states try to obtain some of this technology so that they can interfere with space systems, because they're going to say, well, if we're getting attacked from above, we need to be able to defend ourselves. And what does that do for the cost of space services? Are we looking at a situation where now every single satellite, in addition to everything you have to prepare for now, now you also have to put hardware on it so that you can avoid jamming, or new types of shielding for all the space debris that's going to be out there. And now it has to be more maneuverable, so you need new types of propulsion systems. It keeps.
But isn't that what's happening to any kind of new technology, that people start messing with that technology and trying to outplay it, outdo it, destroy it? The others try to defend it. So just think of the internet. It started as a peaceful communication project. And
so are you saying that we have an arms race in space?
That's what you're saying.
Unfortunately, I have said that. My institute, myself and two other colleagues, Ben Silverstein and John Borey, shout out to you gentlemen, put together a report where we look at indicators and alternative approaches to an arms race in space. And the first question we asked in this paper, because in the UN, as some of you may know, we have an agenda item called the prevention of an arms race in outer space. And we said, well, we've been talking about this for 40 years, and the last 2 years have kind of had some pretty, heavy events. I mean, different countries are announcing new policies. Space forces are springing up. It's not just the Americans. We're seeing more and more testing of some of the new capabilities. Can we still prevent an arms race? And so we looked at some indicators. We looked at rivalries. We looked at the counter space capabilities, and then we also looked at the acceleration of development. And just kind of going over the last couple of years, we thought, man, it's really hard to say that we haven't ticked off all the boxes. So, and it's not that we are in an arms race in space specifically. It's that there is an arms race going on across all the domains. Cyber is one as well. We're seeing new types of missiles. We're seeing new types of ships. We're just seeing new types of, any kind of weapon, anything that some militaries can get their hands on, they will find a way to weaponize it. And space is just a part of it. And so when we talk about our vision for space, our vision for the future, are we comfortable in saying that space is going to be just like every other domain, and it's, conflict is going to be a thing there as well?
And again, it's the human condition, I guess, that we're being confronted with.
Yeah.
Wherever we go, our human halo will follow, and with it, all the issues that we're discussing, no matter here on Earth or a bazillion light years away. Won't you agree?
Yeah. And if that's the case, then maybe the United Nations, we need to be thinking about this issue a little bit differently. And states should be talking about this stuff differently, and academics should start talking about it differently.
Sorry to interrupt you, Daniel, but even at the risk of repeating myself, I think that we're still our own worst enemies. I mean, have we really changed in any way over the past centuries or millennia? Is there anything about us that's different than, say, 2,000 years ago? Isn't it all about territory, domination, and control? I mean, I was recently invited to speak at a TV conference. The topic was ethics and media. But what's the point of an ethics debate when the industry is all about ratings, effectiveness, and visibility? You would have to enforce ethics, and I believe that we are still far from that. I mean, I have the feeling that we are still stuck in Hobbes' homo homini lupus. A man is a wolf to another man. Or a little more contemporary, that we're still knee-deep in dog-eat-dog mentality and seem to like it.
Yeah. Another shout out to a great colleague of mine, Nikki Coleman, down in Australia. She often talks about space ethics. There's also a really great professor now at Emory-Riddle, Sarah Langston, who also does some work in this area. And I shouldn't even try to summarize some of the work that they do, except to say that, it is something I think we should try and introduce more into our discussions and try to bring in the ethics component. To quote the great Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. But again, thinking about how we want to see space ultimately, like what is our vision for the end state? If what we want is this dog-eat-dog world, like you said, if that really is what people want, then okay, that comes with certain benefits and weaknesses. I suppose so. And certainly I think some countries have decided that, yes, it should be dog-eat-dog world and only the strong survive. And they often say that because they are currently the strongest countries. But what goes around comes around. And when somebody gets stronger than you, they will knock you off the hill, and then they'll be the king. And then they'll have to fight everybody else off all the time and spend all of their resources trying to stay on top of their perch.
Yeah.
Is that what we want? If so, fine. That's one way to go. But I think much like yourself, Markus, I find it to be extremely tiresome.
Thank you. I'm not alone in this world.
Well, that's why I work in this business. But unfortunately, one of the things I found is this business is really slow and frustrating, and you have to have a beer every once in a while.
So why don't we, sorry to interrupt, Daniel, but why don't we give NATO a job? Why don't we turn to NATO and link up with NATO and say, come on, do something in space. Not much going on back here on Earth.
I'm hoping that NATO will actually they have said that space is now a domain of operations, whatever that means. And they've also said that an attack on a satellite will trigger collective self-defense. But, what's an attack? The NATO countries and the Russians, they like to poke at each other by jamming each other's satellites from time to time. Well, at what point does poking get taken more seriously and lead to something more? Yeah. So without any clarity on what you mean by an attack, there's a big possibility that maybe a rival country will, accidentally step too far when they think that they're just playing around, and then all of a sudden we've got a full-fledged crisis.
Guys, we're slowly and gradually coming to an end of the show, but can we end it on a positive note? So, is there anything
what's for dinner?
Is there a possibility to end this on a positive note? No, seriously, how do you see the next 10 years in that field, Daniel?
I think we will get the first arms control agreement on something very modest. And I do think it's going to be ASAT test guidelines. In particular, I think so because there are some pretty influential people that have been advocating ASAT test guidelines in Moscow and Washington, D.C. One is Dmitry Rogozin. So the head of Roscosmos last year had 2 press conferences where he was calling for international negotiations on a ban, an outright ban on ASAT testing. And I think, if he understands this issue, he could be a big advocate for it back in Moscow and explain, look, we don't need to hit anything. Just like we did a few weeks ago, let's take this to the table. Likewise, in the United States, a gentleman named Doug Lavero, he's the guy who basically, engineered Space Force from the ground up. Well, now he is head of human spaceflight at NASA. So, and he's been advocating for a ban on ASAT testing for quite some time because he also understands it doesn't benefit anyone. You don't need the data. And if you hit a satellite, you put everyone in danger. Well, now you're not just putting his satellites in danger. Now you're putting his astronauts in danger. And I promise you, Doug Lavero takes that very seriously. So if we could get...
So the more astronauts, I was going to say, the more astronauts or humans we have in space, maybe the less risk. Because everyone's going to have to duck down.
And in fact...
That's your chance, Anna.
It's my chance. I actually want to be a lunar astronaut, believe it or not.
Yeah, who wouldn't? But yeah, so I really think that at the very least, we could see some space traffic management, some rules come up for that, and also some ASAT test guidelines, which they're not nearly enough to solve all our problems with weapons in space, but it's a start.
Thank you so much. Anna, what do you say? Wasn't that incredible?
Head spinning. Thanks, Daniel.
Sorry about that. I know it's a dark subject.
Daniel, and Anna, you already know it. We have a little tradition towards every end of our show, and it's a tradition I really like. It's we call it Space Espresso. Quick shots of your favorite stories about space, completely unprepared. Anna, why don't you give it a shot? What's your current favorite story? Your piece of information you'd like to share when it comes to anything in space? Yeah,
I quite like the news piece that came out this morning on the rocket and satellite company from Pakistan. I think it's great. I think it's a really positive sign that private sector of all shapes and sizes can get involved.
I have to jump in again because it's such.
But I'm slightly biased towards Pakistan.
It's such a cool story. That's just one person, right?
Why don't we have him on the show?
Yeah, totally. We should. We totally should.
Yeah. Okay. I'll hook that up.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah. That's a great plan. Daniel, what's your space espresso?
Space espresso. We've been talking about all these geopolitical challenges and people hating each other. So one of the things that I always love, there's a great book called Two Sides of the Moon, and it's Alexei Leonov, and I can't remember the name of the American astronaut who's talking about it, but it's basically the story of how we got up to the Apollo-Soyuz mission when the Apollo and the Soyuz link up, and the photos of the first handshake, international handshake in space. It's something that really gives me a lot of hope all the time. And I refer to it regularly.
Wow. Thank you for that. All right. So thank you everyone for tuning in, for listening. And you guys out there, if you're still hungry for more, check us out on SpaceWatch.Global. We have daily and fortnightly newsletters, background stories, and much, much more for you in stock. If you, by the way, have a great space story to tell, or you just want to say hi and let us know, get in touch at SpaceWatch.Global. Thank you for listening. This is Anna, Daniel, Markus, over and out. Tune in again in 2 weeks. Till then, take care.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Bye.